I think the biggest challenge in building a business or a company off the ground, again, is, when you start to idolize what it means to build a startup, to be a founder, it's not glamorous like most people think, right? And so, you always have to start by knowing who your customer is or are, right? Who they are. And it's by understanding that you can start building a product.
Welcome to another exciting episode of GWP's Epic Entrepreneur Series. What makes one an epic entrepreneur, you may ask? Epic entrepreneurs possess these 4 traits: vision, passion, adaptability, and resilience. In this episode, we're talking to Serge Amouzou, the mastermind behind Datatrixs, a company dedicated to revolutionizing the way accounting and bookkeeping professionals work in the modern world using AI. Their innovative automation software transforms data crunchers into automation experts, freeing up valuable time and resources for meaningful work. From slashing task completion time from hours into minutes, Serge and his brilliant team are using AI to transform the world. I'm super excited to dive into this episode with Serge because Serge is a friend, Serge is a brother, and Serge is an epic entrepreneur. Are you ready? Let's dive into the episode. Welcome to another episode of GWP. How you doing, man?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm great. We got the man Serge here. Serge, first of all, thank you so much for coming on to GWP podcast. We are so honored to have you as a guest. This is part of a series that we're doing called Epic Entrepreneurs. Epic Entrepreneurs is all about people that I think are doing really great entrepreneurial things. Yeah. And I think we should dive into their mindset. And so we bring them onto the podcast, hear about their story, get them to inspire us to, if we're focused on an entrepreneurial journey, they're going to help us to continue that journey. And if we have other goals, that's fine, but they're going to inspire us. So thank you so much for coming on to inspire us today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me, Papa. Looking forward to, diving into, some of the stories. Yeah.
Yeah. So a little backstory, how I met you is through my friend Paul, who was recently on the podcast, and he was part of the series of the Epic Entrepreneurs. Yeah. Since moving to San Francisco, I've met so many great entrepreneurs. You happen to be one of them. Paul is one of them. And I'm so thankful that I continue to meet you guys. So thanks for coming onto the podcast to share your wisdom with us.
How long have you been in San Francisco?
I've been here for 2 years. And the amount of greatness that I've met since being here, it's unimaginable.
It's an amazing city.
So you asked me how long have I been in San Francisco. You yourself, you're African born, you're from Togo, right? And I'm from Ghana as well. So that's something that we both relate on. You were recently in Togo. How was that journey like?
It was phenomenal. It was great being back home, for the first time after 18 years, I was there for 3 weeks. I surprised my dad. He didn't know I was coming. It was phenomenal. Suddenly I was speaking 2 languages that I hadn't spoken concurrently, for a while, like in 18 years. Right. The first week, it was just scorching hot. I was even getting heat rashes, right? And people who were writing me from here, I wasn't even responding, right? Just because I felt like I was so immersed, I even started dating someone or, and she was writing me and I wasn't responding. I feel like, maybe, it could be the end of things. Yeah. I'm responding after 24 hours.
Yeah.
Right? But it was a phenomenal experience, and, it made me realize that truly we actually are all the same. Whether you're in Togo or here in San Francisco, right? We all actually operate very much the same, right? And so as part of that, I actually want to start melding both worlds now, where I want to travel more to Togo more frequently, like twice a year is sort of my goal now, and then I'm doing some projects there. So if everything pans out, then it means I will be going there much more frequently. But yeah, no, it was a phenomenal trip. We also have properties in multiple cities in the country. So I was traveling from one place to the other and we had a farm. I was on the farm, just being out in nature. It was just phenomenal. So, yeah.
Man, Ghana and Togo we share a lot of things in common.
Yeah. On the trip to one of our villages, we passed right by the border to Togo, right?
That flower border.
Yeah, that's right. And so, I even had some CDs, that my dad still had. And I was like, oh, hey. Yeah.
Hey, maybe you can pass those CDs on to me when I go back to Ghana.
No. I'll keep it for when I go to Ghana.
Oh, good one. Oh, man. So, Serge, one of the things we also want to talk to you about today is, the idea of epic entrepreneurs, right? And that means people who sometimes blaze their own path. And, entrepreneurship is not only about finding an idea and then starting that idea on your own, right? You could be entrepreneurial while you're in a corporation, right? Because sometimes you can innovate within a corporation. I've heard stories about how Google kind of operates this way, right? Where they have almost like these like pods within Google, right? Where they're almost like operating on their own, working on a whole different project, but they're still part of the big Google umbrella. So entrepreneurial skills can really be used any and everywhere. And so for you, is there any inspiration back home? You've gone back 18 years ago while you were back home. Is there anything that you connected to that made you say, you know what? This is where I get that entrepreneurial spirit from. Did you find anything like that there?
Yeah, well, so, so first of all, my dad is an entrepreneur. So growing up, this is all I've known, right? He had a construction company. My dad's built houses for former presidents of our country. He's built, he's built pretty much half of the country, right? Like schools, bridges, post offices. So for all intents and purposes, this is all I've known growing up, right? And so I think when I became an entrepreneur, it wasn't like a conscious decision. I didn't like sit down and be like, oh, this is what I want to do. It turns out that's just what I knew, right? And so I realized I want to continue that legacy of building. But to your point about, being essentially, that's called being an entrepreneur, right? Like, being someone who's an entrepreneur within a big corporation, right? As a corporation, you want to bring on people who have that entrepreneurial mindset, right? But who will more likely thrive by being part of your organization, right? Those are some of the best employees to have, right? People who are entrepreneurial because, they can take initiatives, they can really move things forward, and you can have the support or the structure to help them do that. And this is actually what, it's the reason some of the best organizations today exist, right? Being able to essentially being a leader that can give people room to grow. That's ultimately what it comes down to, right? As a leader, you want to create, let's call it a playground where incredibly smart people can come in and build something that they're passionate about, right? With the resources that you're providing them.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. So for you, it sounds like it's all about creating that space, right? Being that leader. Almost, you talk about a playground also, which I think of companies such as like Microsoft, for example, right? That have been there for such a long time. Yeah. Imagine if they're not creating that space for people to be entrepreneurs, right? Be able to create in a big firm. It's really important because not everyone is going to be an entrepreneur and be able to start their own thing. Even though this series that we're doing is called Epic Entrepreneurs, and we want to highlight that, we also want to bring people's attention to say, not everyone can be an entrepreneur. And sometimes also you kind of need to start somewhere, right? There's the ability where you can go and start in a really big firm. And, this happens with a lot of hedge funds, right? You get these people that work in large hedge funds and so on. And eventually they spin off because they learn so much and they build their own strategies and their own proprietary systems that makes them unique and successful in their own way. They spin off, they go do their own thing, and they're really successful. Yeah. But what they're leaning on is that experience that they gain from that corporate world, and then they transfer it. And so the point I try to make here is you shouldn't take for granted whatever you're doing right now, right? Because even you yourself as an entrepreneur right now, you're the CEO and the founder of Datatrixs, but that's not where you started, right? Tell us about your journey.
Yeah. And before I dive into that, I'll also say, as it relates to Africa or to Togo, right? One of the things I've observed is that we African generally, we're natural entrepreneurs, right? Because we grew up for lack of a better word, we grew up in harsh environments, right? Where we had to just be resourceful, all the time. And that's part of the definition of being an entrepreneur, right? It's actually just taking risks, right? And the way to mitigate risk is to, be resourceful, to so that you're closing the gaps as you go along, right? And as Africans, we grew up in a harsh environment, right? Therefore, making us natural born entrepreneurs, whether people realize it or not. And it's one of the reasons why, I want to say, it's true for most foreigners who come to the US, but I will speak to, us Africans. It's one of the reasons we can become great entrepreneurs if we set our sights on it, right? Because we're naturally incredibly resourceful. And so now suddenly we're in a country where we can have some resources behind us, then it's just like, rocket fuel, right? And so therefore we take off like a rocket, right? And so, but in terms of my journey as an entrepreneur, so I'm a self-taught software engineer. I moved to the US when I was 12, and I started learning how to code, when I was in high school, and I started building websites and web apps for parents of friends, who were starting businesses. And at one point, my mom actually told me, she was like, "Look, you should probably turn this into a company because what happens if someone sues you, right? You don't want to be personally liable." I was like, that's actually a great idea, right? And so then I incorporated the company, and boom, there it goes. That was really the start of my entrepreneurial journey. And from there, I was actually lucky to exit that company when I was 21. And then since then, I've just been starting businesses from there.
Amazing. So I love that you talk about how your mom told you to, incorporate the business. It sounds like sometimes ideas can come from anywhere, right? And when you're thinking of starting your first business, you started as a data
Engineer,
software engineer. You never really know where the inspirations can come from, right? Because it could be when you're trying to figure out what kind of business to start, it could be in your environment, right? It could be something that's lacking in your environment, or it could be even in your personal life.
Yeah.
You could see and say, you know what, this is one thing that I really need, and I'm going to create it. And then once you create it, the next thing you know, it serves a massive purpose, right? Have you experienced that in your journey?
What do you mean?
In terms of, let's say I, as a person, I walk to the grocery store every single day, right? And I realize, if I could create something that makes that walk more fun than just walking to the grocery store, that boring walk. So maybe I create a video game that I play on my way to the grocery store, right? Yeah. It's through my own personal life. I've created something that addresses a need for me. And then the next thing you know, there's other 10 grocery store walkers, right? That find out, man, I could actually use this application, right? While I'm walking to the store.
Yeah.
In your journey as an entrepreneur, have you found some of these, similarities?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, successful businesses are based on the foundation that there's a real problem that needs to be solved, right? And oftentimes you can start by solving a pain point for your own self, right? And then it turns out that there's other people experiencing that same thing, right? And then suddenly, you experience what's called scale, right? Because not only are there, 5 of you on the block who need it, but actually it turns out, someone in Michigan, someone in, Boston, hey, someone actually around the world need that same solution, right? And so, for me, one of the exciting part of building is really that impact when suddenly people who aren't just, within your vicinity start using your product, right? For example, I mean, one of the companies I built was actually a fintech startup where we built a point-of-sale system for restaurants, right? That actually also had a mobile component where as a consumer, you can interface with the restaurant, meaning that at the end of your meal, you can just get up and leave or just pay for your phone and everything else is taken care of, right? And that's actually what's proliferated in the US now, right? When you go to a restaurant, they come to you with a tablet, right? So, we actually build some of the fundamentals of that technology, right? To allow restaurants to be able to serve their customers right at the table, right? And part of the build out of that actually is designed so that, service workers can actually earn more net income, right? Because, my thought for starting the company initially was that people who work at a restaurant, they work so hard, but they earn so little, right? And so how do we help them earn more? Right. And part of that is bringing in technology where now suddenly, through your phone, you're tipping 18%, 20%, it just makes it easier. Right. But yet the work for them is made easier. Right. Where they don't, fundamentally, we were thinking about all the back and forth that people had to do, right, in order to serve you, they take your order, go to some system, input it in, go to the next table. It's physically demanding. Right. And so we built a platform that made it easier. You just have a table, you get everything done and it's good to go. Right. And so that's fundamentally, what it means to sort of build a solution that addresses a problem. Because not only, we're making lives easier for service workers, right? They're earning more. And part of my thinking around that is also that allowing people to find inspiration, right? When you now suddenly have time to think for yourself a little bit, right? Well, now you can start sort of catering to your own dreams, right? Thinking about, that art project I was doing, right? Suddenly you find your passion again, right? Because you have some time and you actually are able to earn revenue. You're not just constantly, transferring your time for money, right? So that was the fundamental for that. And I was lucky enough back in those days to have earned an award. I was nominated for CEO of the Year. So I was very fortunate for that. But I think it was more, prevalent of the work we were doing, right? Helping service workers earn more and actually find much more meaning in life as well.
And now, the one thing. Given that we're talking about AI, let's ask Google's Gemini, what are some of the top 5 companies you will start, given everything you know as an AI? Number 1 is said sustainable packaging solutions. Given the growing environmental concerns, focusing on an innovative, eco-friendly packaging solutions could be a great company. Good one. Number 2, an AI-powered mental health support to provide personalized mental health resources and even guided therapies. That's a good one. Third, a cybersecurity for Internet of Things. Given more devices are connecting to the internet, securing smart homes and connected cars could provide a peace of mind for people. That's a great company. Okay, number 4, a hyper-personalized learning platform to utilize AI to adapt to children's or students' needs. Great one. Okay, these are great ideas, but remember, you need the 4 traits that I talked about in order to be an epic entrepreneur. Number 1, you need to have that vision. You have to see it when nobody else sees it. You have to be able to visualize the future and have a mission. Number 2 is passion. Entrepreneurship is extremely difficult. And so without the passion, you might fall along the wayside. Next is adaptability. When things don't go the way you expected them to go, you need to be able to adapt. And what about resilience? That's the final trait. You need to be able to bounce back. You need to have the mentality of falling 10 times and getting up 500 times. Now, back to the episode with Serge Amouzou.
Yeah, no, I love that. And that's something we're going to dive into, right? Which is actually allowing people to become even more efficient at their jobs, right? Yeah. You're the founder and the CEO of Datatrixs, which uses AI in a very brilliant way. So excited to dive into the AI conversation with you. Can't wait to dive into that. But some of the things you talk about is impact and then scale, right? And man, when I think of scale, I think it's such an interesting thing, right? Because like what we're talking about, you create this little application for this one person and all of a sudden 10 people find it useful, 15 people, right? And then 200 people, 10,000 people. And then the next thing you know, it's a global thing. It's like, it becomes the next Instagram or something like that. You know, for someone that's just getting started on their journey, right? Maybe they're just a young adult right now. They're just getting started and they're like, man, one day I want to create something, right? But when you think of scaling right now, it sounds like, man, this is like this big mountain that you want to climb, right? You're only at the bottom of the mountain and you're looking at this huge mountain. Oh my God, how am I going to actually even start this, right? That cold start problem. How am I going to start this? And how am I going to get it even to the middle of the mountain and then finally to the top and then roll it over, right? What does that talk look like? What's that thought process? What are you going to tell that person right now if they're maybe sitting down and brainstorming that idea right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think scale is it's almost like an afterthought. What I mean by that is scaling is like a description of a bunch of experiments that you've done that finally start to work. So starting out, I wouldn't be so worried about, finding scale, right? Because again, scaling is sort of almost a byproduct of a ton of experimentation, right? Yeah. And that's why we just start calling scaling because, that's the only way we can describe it. But in order to truly achieve scale, I tend to not want to repeat things that are generally repeated in the startup world, but it's like you have to start by doing things that don't scale initially, right? When we talk about that one user, right, you have to be maniacal about, serving that one user so well, meaning that your product actually addresses what they really need, right, and it's working for them. That's really how it starts, right? Because once it actually works for that person, they naturally will probably tell their friends. And their friends will tell their friends, right? And then next thing you know, you have a bunch of people who you don't know who are talking about it, who are using it, who are sort of doing the thing that you want them to do, right? But it all starts from that initial phase of understanding that one person really well and making sure that their experience is just phenomenal, right? Like your product works for them, it solves a pain point for them. And so suddenly, without that, right, it doesn't work, right? And I think, maybe one thing that I'll even share with people is that, when you start out with sort of this big ideal of what you want to create, right? We all do, because, that's the whole premise of it. Always be mindful that there's just so much advice out there that actually doesn't apply to when you're getting off the ground, right? You can be so idealistic that you forget that you have to start by doing things unscalably, right? Including how to even get those people, right? So for example, that one person may start using the product, but in order to find the second person, you may have to literally walk the street and be like, hey, look, I'm building this. Can you check it out, right? And actually really almost forcibly find people to use it and test it and try to see if it actually makes sense, right? And that's not something that's scalable, right? You can't say, oh yeah, this is how we're gonna build our business forever. The reality is that you can't just walk on the street every single day to build your business to 1 million users or $1 million in revenue, right? There's got to be a point where you can start systematizing that, right? But initially, to think of scale would be to just idealize the startup world so much, right? You should start by first thinking, how do I get this into the hands of one person? And how do I make sure that that person really, really enjoys the experience? Because if they do, they're likely going to start doing the work for you, right? And then, as you keep progressing and going further, and in fact, what I actually wanted to dive into is even before getting to that product, right? A lot of people, or generally, people think, oh, let's go raise a bunch of money and build and build. And you can do that, but not everyone can go and just raise a bunch of money and do, right? And so if you're looking at how to start, for example, right, I would say, like, if you already have a job, I would say you keep that job, right? Save up some money, and start working on your project on the side. I mean, truly, right? Being ambitious is incredibly important, right? But it's best not to skip steps, such as saying, oh, look, I'm so ambitious that I know I'm going to find the money tomorrow to just build this. No, that's not true. I mean, again, if it's true for you, great, right? If you already can figure that out, perfect. But if not, I think the best, just taking a step back, is like, if you already have a job, leverage that, right? Use that to save up some money. And when you get to a point where your side project is suddenly, now you have some users, some customers, and it starts to bring in some revenue to the point where you feel like, okay, you know what? I feel like I've seen some traction here now. So let me actually think about quitting my job because I actually have revenue coming in, or, hey, actually, I know I have this investment coming in because in fact, I've confirmed it. Then that's when I would say, leave your job, right? And then focus on this because you already have seen some traction. But before that, I wouldn't focus so much on scaling without making sure that the fundamentals are in place.
Yeah. Wow. That's pretty good. Because the points that you're making there, especially right now, is that, the whole idea of gig working, right? So having a side gig and so on. But a lot of people also feel like, okay, maybe I have to be all in. If not, then I'm not in at all, right? And what you're saying is, no, they kind of take a different approach and maybe start small, gain some traction, and then run with it, right? Yeah. So it's almost like you're slowing down to speed up, type of thing, which is amazing. So thank you for sharing that.
Absolutely.
So let's dive into another topic that I want to talk about, which is, so you're saying as an entrepreneur, you kind of want to create something that people want, right? And that's not always possible, right? And you're also saying you need to be talking to the people that you're creating this thing for to learn what they're looking for, what they need, and so on. What if you actually create something and people don't want it? Or how do you deal with those difficult conversations, right? When clients or when users are giving you that harsh, not harsh, but very constructive feedback.
Yeah, no, it is possible to build something people want. It comes down to, again, starting with the fundamentals, right? Talking to people. I think the biggest challenge in building a business or a company off the ground, again, is, when you start to idolize what it means to build a startup, to be a founder, it's not glamorous like most people think, right? And so, you always have to start by knowing who your customer is or are, right? Who they are. And it's by understanding that you can start building a product, right? So if you know who you're building for, you can ask them questions, literally. I mean, you should never build a product without having talked to people, right? And as you build the prototype, show it to people, have them test it, see how they're functioning, right? And so it is possible to build something people want. You just have to take a step back, do user interviews. You have to talk to people, understand their pain points, and really wonder, is this even something that they actually really want? And unless you've seen or have seen the data that supports that this is something that people actually want, then you don't need to build that. So the reason why people build things that people don't want, there are multiple factors that goes into it. Again, it goes to resources, right? Do you have the resources to actually build something, right? Because the challenge is, and also for, I try to avoid this topic now just because, I try not to waste my energy or spend my energy on topics that, are truly not conducive, right? Like such as being a minority and things of that nature. Like at the end of the day, we're Africans, and I talk about being resourceful, right? And I think unfortunately, sometimes being in a country like the US, where like for example, racism is prevalent, right? And so so I try not to spend so much energy focusing on that, right? And so it comes down to resources, right? If you don't have the resources to build a product that people want, people may actually tell you this is what we want, but because of resource constraint, if you can only build half of that, it's still not yet what people want, right? And so if you find yourself spinning it around where you're like, man, we're making some progress, but it's not really there, it's because, well, have you checked whether or not you have the resources, right, to actually build a full-fledged product, right? Because people are not going to use half-baked product, right? And so to build something, it always costs. I mean, it doesn't, for lack of a better word, I don't care what anyone tells you, starting a business of any kind requires startup capital. Okay. Mm-hmm. And there's a fallacy when people say they've bootstrapped, people like to just think that somehow these people, I don't know, they just pull money out of their own pocket, right? And I think some people do that, but what I see happening is that people are misunderstanding the aspect of bootstrapping. Most businesses that are bootstrapped, usually those founders are already kind of well off, or at least they have family members that can help. Maybe some have already partnered. So like maybe the partner is supporting them while they're building, right? But there's absolutely no way. I mean, I just want to debunk this fallacy. There's no way you can actually build a product without resources being available. And so this goes back to the point I was making earlier about if you already have a job, you should keep that and build on the side, right? And so, yeah, you have to think about your resource constraint. Do you actually have the capital to bring in the right people? Like for example, if you're building a software, right? If you're not an engineer, well, you need a co-founder, right? Well, how are you going to find that co-founder? How are you going to pay them, right? Well, if you're already an engineer, it's great. You can build a product, but at some point you have to learn how to sell it, right? And what oftentimes happens with engineers is, we tend to, every engineer is different, but practically all the same, right? We tend to build product because you can always just keep building product, right? But without looping in a human to review and give feedback on that, you may end up building the wrong thing. Because in engineering, as you're building, it's always nice to just add this little extra thing. But honestly, what's the impetus for adding that thing? There's none, right? But it just happens to be a fun engineering problem to solve. Right. So therefore, you may end up building things that people don't want because you're not factoring in the feedback that you're getting. Right. Otherwise, it's very possible to build what people want by just talking to people and incorporating that into your software development life cycle.
Yeah. Well, it's a lot you talk about there that I want to unpack. But one of the things that you just did is you just debunked the fallacy, which is really important. I'm sure there are a lot of fallacies out there, a lot of misconceptions out there that entrepreneurs may have, such as maybe when I get the startup going, I'm going to be rich and that's the end of it, right? I'm going to retire and kick it in the Bahamas. Are there any, because you've been a lifelong, you're like a 5-time founder, right? So you found many, many companies. Are there any fallacies or misconceptions that are there that people think about startups that, they should not think that way?
Yeah, I think I think the first, you always have to be introspective, right? You have to understand the type of person you are to even become an entrepreneur. Because I think truly not everyone can be an entrepreneur. Not everyone should be an entrepreneur, right? And so, some things you learn after the fact, right? They always say hindsight is 20/20. Right. But no, being a founder is not glamorous. Yes, the upsides are, can be, extremely rewarding. Right. But the initial days, there's just so much happening. You wear many hats. And actually, so this is also the thing about wearing many hats. It actually is not conducive to building a business. Right. And so I always like people to think about it. And this is what I mean by not idolizing the being a founder or being a sort of startup, like there's just so much, we've romanticized that so much where we start doing things because we think that's what we've heard and not so much, and not think critically about what our business actually needs, right? Just sort of, I wonder what the point I was trying to make there, fundamentally, like for example, when it comes to fundraising, right? I'll just give one example here. A lot of people romanticize the aspect of we want to get some big checks, we should be getting $1 million, so that we can have only a few people on our cap table, right? Well, that's good and well for maybe the person who's well connected and likely who's part of the majority, right? I mean, I talk about being a minority. It's incredibly difficult to run a startup as a minority in the US, right? Like it just is, right? It's not the same as for, like a white guy, for example, right? That's just the reality. And so, a lot of the fallacy becomes founders who are going out there saying, oh yeah, we need to talk to these top tier VC, or hey, we can only take this amount of investment or like this big check because we don't want to clutter our cap table. Well, guess what? You're not going to have a business if you refuse to take the 10K, the 20K, the 25K that your angel friends are giving you, right? Because you're afraid that your cap table is going to be a mess, right? No, better have a messy cap table, right? Than to be at a point where actually those VCs that you think are going to invest in you are not even writing you a check, but yeah, you're idolizing them, right? That they're going to write you a check and you staying away from picking up the smaller checks, right? So that's one of the big things that I'm, with my team right now, I always tell my team and our advisors where it's like, look, no, if an angel investor wants to put in 20K, we're going to take that 20K, right? Because, it's in business, it's all about time, right? Time kills deal. I don't want to, sort of just, use adages and things like that, but time does kill deals, right? Mm-hmm. If someone is saying, hey, look, I want to be an investor, and you're like, okay, that's cool. But then you wait like 3 months before because that's when the round is closing. Well, suddenly things have already happened. Now this person's got other things happening and they can no longer even become investors, right? And so, that's one of the fallacies in which it's all about understanding what you need for your business, mm-hmm. and not so much what's out there in the startup world, because there's a lot of misinformation about startups in the startup world.
Yeah, one of the statistics that I had read very recently is CFOs. It was about CFOs, is how their work is going to be the most stressful jobs in the coming years. I think that should probably be reframed, right? Because I feel like entrepreneurship or just being a founder from a startup and so on is probably going to be one of the most difficult jobs in the coming years. Because up until very recently, I think private equity and VCs weren't releasing that much money, right? They weren't writing a lot of checks. And so when that's not happening, then you're going back to bootstrapping. And your point about bootstrapping, it's very, very difficult, right? The average American can come up with $400 in the case of an emergency. So you're talking about someone that maybe they're already struggling, but now they come up with an idea and now they have to, work and flesh out the idea. And to your point, you need that capital, right? To bring that idea to life. Ideas are cheap. If you don't have the capital, you cannot really realize the ideas, right? And so could you share any stories of, people that maybe came up with an idea and maybe it was really difficult to come up with the capital, and so maybe they had to bootstrap or they had to find other creative ways to raise money, since you're in this network with these people?
Well, I mean, I think all that story is later on the internet, right? It's easy to find stories like that. And so, I try to focus on how do we get things done. As founders, you have one job, is to get things done, right? And so that's what I tend to focus on. But yeah, I mean, the number one reason why businesses fail is because lack of capital, lack of product market fit, right? Things of that nature. And so, this goes back to what I was saying earlier in terms of, look, as minority founders, it's just incredibly difficult to secure resources for your business. It doesn't matter how great your idea is. I can tell you, I have a bunch of friends who raise millions, even just on, just thinking about the idea, like, yeah, we want to do this. And they go raise a couple $1 million, right? Whereas, as a minority founder, you may even already have the product. You may even have some paying customers, but yeah, VCs are not coming in, right? And it's not, and those are some of the learning after. It's not that you're not less than, right? It's just that there's actually a real thing. There's actually a real racism happening, and I think oftentimes as foreigners, it can be harder to quickly pick up on that, right? Because we didn't grow up in the social environment where suddenly our race was actually against us, right? We grew up in a society where we're all the same. So again, just having been back in Togo, I could easily relate to everyone, right? But yet it's almost as though like we still care about each other, right? Because that person is just, that's your countryman, things are just boom, boom, let's get things done, right? And so for us foreigners, it takes us a little bit of time to realize that, oh, well, yeah, we could just have this dreamy idea and then expect to just go and raise some capital for it and get it done, right? I mean, again, if you're a white guy, like that's easy, you can do it, right? And oftentimes I also see now that, when we talk about the topic of discrimination, there's even some people who are like, no, discrimination no longer exists. That's just not true. It does exist, right? It's just the difference between someone agreeing with your idea being great, right? And say, look, yeah, we should go build that. Or like, oh yeah, for whatever reason, your idea is never great, right? That's discrimination, right? And so there's a lot of people who actually sort of believe and think that discrimination, you should just, keep going. And yeah, you should keep going, but you should be strategic about it, right? Yeah. Do not be naive to think that just because you have this great idea, you can just, get an investor to invest in your business. You should be strategic. As I said, if you have a job, keep that job. If you don't, maybe find a job to have some sort of security, right? Unless you have some sort of saving for yourself for like a year, right? Then it becomes harder to do. And so, yeah, I mean, I think, you sort of the question you ask is, like how can people essentially find those resources, right?
Yeah.
And it's just being strategic, right? Meeting the right people, always being passionate about the idea. But again, you have to take an assessment initially of where you're starting, right? Do you have the resources? If not, then keep this path and do not try to go the glamorous way too quickly or suddenly because it's just not glamorous.
Yeah. Some very good advice there. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Yeah.
So another part is...
Oh, and by the way, like in terms of entrepreneurship has probably still been one of the hardest professions or roles since the dawn of time. I don't know if that's ever going to change, right? And so as you speak about CFO, so for example, one of the problems we're solving is that 75% of CPAs in the US, right, are boomers. And so they are retiring, right? And the rate of new entrants is like 50%, right? And so the industry needs more automation now more than ever, right? So that's what we're providing them. And so, the role of the CFO, it's going to be automated, right? But the thing is, there will always be a need for human insight, right? And so I would argue that the role for the CFO is actually going to get easier, right? And the reason why, for example, a lot of 300,000 CPAs have left their job in the past 2 years, right? Statistically, that's actually a thing, right? Is because not only are they retiring, but the new ones, they're not interested in making $62,000 a year, right? They want, we're in a new economy, right? People are becoming content creators rather than becoming, accountants, right? And so yeah, from the CFO standpoint, I think there's going to be a lot more automation that we're going to see, but the job of the founder it's not going to get any easier.
Yeah. No, that's a great point. I love that you added that in there because very recently we had Eric Bell, who is a certified public accountant. He's a CPA. He's also a professor of accounting at UC Berkeley, and runs his own firm and so on. So great guy. We had him on the podcast, and one of the things that we were talking to him about was the state of the industry, of the accounting industry. And one of the things he shared is, accountants are needed when the economy is thriving. Accountants are needed when the economy is bad, right? Because, let's say a company goes into bad times and they're trying to figure out, we're going to lean out, we're going to cut some jobs. Of course, like, you're going to go to the accountant first, right? To figure out which parts of the payroll are you going to be able to cut and so on. And when you're doing good, you would probably go back to the accountant and see which part of the payroll is driving our performance and can we invest there and so on. And so it's interesting that you say that, but I guess that's a great segue to talk about your company, Datatrixs, right? Which is focused on, like you said, creating a better workflow and, a better platform for accountants, right? Yeah. And streamlining their work and so on. Could you tell us a little bit more about what Datatrixs does and what is the future of Datatrixs?
Yeah, absolutely. So, for us, when it comes to, essentially, we're productivity software for CPAs, right? And fundamentally what we're solving is that, when it comes to the month-end advisory, without our software, they're in multiple software, right? They're in the, typical accounting software, QuickBooks, Xero, et cetera, et cetera. They're in spreadsheets, they're in PowerPoint, they're in Canva, just to put together advisory reporting for the client. And this takes them on average 4 to 6 hours per client. And if you think of an accounting firm, they have like hundreds, sometimes even, hundreds of customers, right? And so with our software, that entire process happens within one hub and it takes them just 15 minutes. Right. And so with our software, we can actually help CPA firms scale from, let's say, 100 customers to 400 customers without augmenting the workforce. Right. And using the latest in machine learning to really help automate those processes. So that's Datatrixs in a nutshell.
Yeah. And you talk about the software and what it can do. I had the privilege of learning a lot more about Datatrixs. And so I know AI is the power behind Datatrixs in a lot of ways. Yeah. AI is a buzzword right now, right? Everywhere you go, it's all about the AI. For Datatrixs, what does AI mean to, how you guys operate?
Yeah. For us, so we think the future, ultimately our goal is to automate businesses, right? To put businesses on autopilot. And what does that mean? It means that, we're building something for ourselves, like this is sort of in the background. Essentially, it's causal AI, right? Causal AI is to be able to predict cause and effect, right? With a high degree of accuracy, right? So where we can be in a place where a business owner can look at a dashboard, for example, and say, hey, look, and then actually give it input, right? Hey, look, we're an e-commerce business. We have this much in revenue, this year, this how old we are, this how many employee, marketing spend, et cetera. And based on that data point, the software can actually say, hey, look, increase your marketing spend, this amount to increase revenue, this percentage, or hey, augment your sales headcount with 2 additional sales, SDRs to increase revenue 20%, et cetera. And being able to do that with a high degree of accuracy, right? That's what causal AI, and that's fundamentally what we have in the background, right? And this is going to take a couple of years to actually perfect, right? Or even really get truly functional, because any company that tells you right now that they have predictive analytics, it's just basically looking at existing data and just summarizing the existing trend, right? But being able to say, due to, your, revenue or marketing spend last quarter, you need to spend this amount to increase revenue, this percent with a high degree of accuracy. That is not really yet possible, right? Because again, that's actually predictive analytics, right? Where it's looking at, historicals, right, to predict the future, but it has to do with a high degree of accuracy, right? And so we have a ton of data truth that we're using right now to train our own models, right? So that, you can really get to essentially it's called progressive analysis, right? Which is looking at the future, and that's why it's called predictive, but really it's progressive analysis, and it looks at regressive data, right? To be able to give you that progressive analysis as a result. So that's fundamentally what we're building. That's where we think the world is headed, where, not only do businesses need to rely on their CPAs, et cetera, but now they themselves can log into the dashboard and see exactly what's happening. And no, we're not cutting out the, cutting out the CPAs, right? Because they'll always be there. Like, there's certain taxes that you always need a human to revise it, right? And so But we think the world will be in a place where even CPAs can use our software to grow their own practice, right? As a result. But think about that business owner who can actually, as a matter of fact, let's say, they're on vacation in Fiji or Bahamas, right? And she opens up her phone and it tells her everything she needs to do. Oh yeah, due to, sales headcount last quarter, add 2 more in order for revenue to be this in the next 2 quarters, right? And all the action items are there. And again, with high degree of accuracy, this is the big difference. It actually has to have a high degree of accuracy in order for it to actually matter and make sense, right? For that business owner to trust it, right? And for the whole team to be able to see that. And so all they have to do now is all the action items are there. All they have to do is just execute, right?
Yeah.
And then see the result of that.
Yeah. So I love that you mentioned that this is not going to replace CPAs and financial professionals, because that's a big concern with AI, right? Even with autonomous vehicles, we're saying, hey, why are you going to replace drivers? And what's going to happen to Uber drivers and so on? So that's a big concern. And the technology has a lot of runway. It has a lot of room to grow. So it's not even at that point yet. And so I love that you mentioned that, because again, when we talk to Eric Bell, who is a CPA and a professor for accounting, one of the things he talks about is accountants are business advisors, right? You can't, AI could be your co-pilot, but AI cannot be your business advisor.
Yeah.
You need to be able to pick up that balance sheet. And because there's a reason why companies do earnings calls, right? They don't just post the numbers and say, hey, here are the numbers, you figure it out. No, they post the numbers and they do an earnings call because it needs to be interpreted. There's a story behind it that AI can just tell you that story, and even if AI told you that story, there's also some mechanisms behind it. Whether it's, some emotional, physical, some things that the AI just cannot incorporate into all that machine learning that happens, and so that's where the accountant comes in and they become that partner that can interpret the data in a certain way that the AI might not understand, might need some human connection to it, right? And so that, I love that you mentioned that. And, for people that are listening that are maybe concerned and saying, man, I wanted to go to school to be an accountant. I think now more than ever, it's, how do you become that accountant and even have a leg up to say, okay, maybe I'm going to do some accounting, but I'm also going to add some computer analytics to it. I'm going to add some, computer science, some CS to it, right? Just to be able to have that edge in the market. It's going to be really important.
Yeah, no, I think what's going to happen in the future is, instead of your traditional CPA getting trained in spreadsheets, for example, right? It'll be possible in the future that they train in software like ours, for example, right? Because fundamentally what we focus on is helping CPAs write up those trend analysis, right? And doing it much more efficiently. So basically, we basically take that advisory process, right? And automate it for them and make it easier for them to even put it together, right? So instead of being in multiple, different software just to arrive at that, they're within one central hub. They get everything that they can manage all of their clients there, right? And so we actually see a future where, instead of being trained in spreadsheets and things like that, maybe CPAs are trained in a software that is helping them just quickly summarize trend and have AI as a co-pilot, right? Because quickly they can have AI do the work, but they can just quickly, because they actually know what the work needs to be, they can quickly make edits, right? Or essentially supervise it, right? To have the outcome that they need as a result. I think an example I love to use for this is a company that I think we all know, like Figma, right? It used to be, Photoshop. You learn Photoshop as a designer in school, right? But ultimately, at some point, I think now it's Figma, right? That you learn, right? And it's not that, we don't need designers anymore. It's just that there's an evolution of sort of the technical tool set, right, that are needed to get the job done.
I love that you use that example. And then it's always going to keep changing also, right? So for that person that's in school right now, that's saying, man, I was going to be an accountant, but now I don't know. Remember, even if you were in the workforce, you would be training to learn new things because it's always evolving. It's going to keep evolving. And so if you're in that stage and you're not in the workforce yet, think of how you can actually evolve before you get into the workforce. It's almost like look through the peephole to see what they need before you get in there. So that when you get in there, you're bringing what they need. And it's like, oh my God, this guy's actually different. You bring a different sort of skills to the table, which is much needed right
Yeah,
now.
absolutely. And on top of that, for us at Datatrixs, one of the, we're a global company, right? And so one of the focus that we have on the African continent is training people to become data scientists or data analysts and being able to use our software to work for companies, in Europe and here in the US, right? Where let's say companies in let's say in Europe, they need CPAs. Well, where can they go where the cost is low, yet the people are making, higher than normal earning that they will normally earn in a place like Togo, for example, right? And so that's, fundamentally part of our goal, where on the African continent, we literally can actually help upskill people to earn more, right? As part of the global marketplace.
Yeah, no, I love that. And that's amazing. So speaking of AI, AI is super exciting. And I've been doing a lot of reading, watching videos, research, and so on about AI. And so you talk about causal AI, right?
Yeah.
And there's also generative AI. And with generative AI, that brings ChatGPT into the picture. And one of the things I wanted to talk about is, I guess, the challenge of hallucination, where, the AI is fed with all this information, which is the machine learning that happens. And based off that information that the model gets fed with, it's able to predict some other information. But from time to time, it hallucinates and comes up with all these like inaccurate hallucinations and suggestions and answers and so on. And some of them are so confident you would think the AI is correct, but it's not correct. And one of the things you talk about with Datatrixs, right, is being able to create this level of accuracy for the data that you provide for these CPAs that are going to be relying on it, because it's going to be the co-pilot, right? So we sort of imagine someone in front of a board doing a presentation, which is the presentation is powered by Datatrixs, because, with the models that Datatrixs build, you're able to create that presentation for the board and so on and tell your story. What is the challenge, right, that you're facing right now with making sure that that data is accurate, relating it to that hallucination piece with generative AI?
Yeah. So, I mean, if you think about OpenAI, ChatGPT, they're LLMs, right? Large language models. So ChatGPT is actually not great with math or with numbers, right? That's something that I think a lot of people don't realize. It's trained on language, right? Like it knows the alphabet in and out. But when it comes to, numbers, right? It's not LLMs, right? That we're doing computation. I mean, it's algorithms, calculations, and there's actually a lot of data input, right? They are learning, sort of from trend from a previous business, for example, right? Looking at the evolution of the company and from a pure numbers standpoint, right? So for example, we can have a data set like, oh, hey, we have this company that has this, say, 20-year time span, right? Within the first year, the capital expenditure is, let's say, I don't know, 10 million, right? And the revenue has been, as a result, 15 million, right? And hey, as part of that capital expenditure, maybe 20% was for marketing, maybe they, spent $2 million, right, on marketing. Sales was this as a result, right? So that's just one company, right? But being able to use multiple companies, right, with similar data set and be able to train the model. So now the model can start deducing its own trend, right, based on the fact that it's so, right, that's how you train an AI model, right? You give it a bunch of data set, right? And ultimately, it can start sort of learning and predicting based on with a high degree of accuracy, right? Whether or not the prediction is actually accurate, right? And so in our case, the data that we're using to train our model is actually it's a lot of numbers, right? And so our aim is that once we actually sort of at launch, right, where we can put this into the real world, it's learned from enough data set that, again, the degree, the level of accuracy can be high. But just like in AI, it always needs new data, right? And it learns as it grows and as it gets better, right? So, the work is never finished, right? In training an AI model. That's what I mean. This fundamental difference between large language models and, actually sort of mathematical. So if you can think of it as OpenAI and ChatGPT is focused on, language models, right? And we're focused on numbers.
Yeah, no, that's a great one. Thanks for sharing that. So AI is rapidly going to change the world. In any case, I think it's probably going to make us more efficient. It's definitely going to disrupt. It's already disrupting in so many different ways. So for a young adult right now that's maybe in, they're probably not even in college yet, right? They're trying to figure out, okay, maybe they're going to go into college. What am I going to study, right? The world is changing so fast. All I hear about is AI. Or for that young adult that's already in college, maybe they're in that first year, right? That deciding stage where it's like, man, I'm kind of lost, because I had that journey, right? Where I went to college and I was kind of lost for almost like a year and a half. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I wish at that time I could peep through that peephole and see what's going on in the business world, what's going on in the real world, what are the challenges they're facing, what do they need, so that I can position myself while I was in college before I get there. If someone is in that position right now, what are you going to tell them?
Yeah, I mean, I will say, they're probably already doing it, just embracing AI, right? I mean, I actually think the future is going to be for those who are comfortable, not necessarily being the people doing the things, right? This is actually very true of managers. Let's say, for example, people who are the best managers in organization, right? Take Google, LinkedIn, all these big companies that we know. The people who earn more are, for, relatively speaking, are the managers, right? And what does a manager do? They delegate, right? They know how to put and where to put all the team members, right? But they don't actually physically do the work. They shouldn't technically be doing the work, right? And so I always like to think the future belongs to those who are comfortable delegating, right? Where you don't feel like you must be the one putting your brute force into something, right? And I think this is the same scenario when it comes to AI, right? I think in the future is the person who's comfortable, right, asking AI to do things for them, right? And so it comes out to, I guess, getting better at asking AI to do things and what it should be doing for you, right? So a lot of people will say prompt engineering, but I really don't think that's really I think in a couple of years, prompt engineering, you will not necessarily need an engineer, right? But it's just about getting really good at knowing what to ask of AI and being comfortable with the result and being able to say, okay, I actually like to change this a little bit, right? And not thinking that you have to get the credit for everything. Because that's actually a huge fallacy, thinking that it actually goes back to trading time for money, right? And so those who are going to be, most successful are the ones who are going to be knowing what prompts to ask it and being able to leverage those responses and those results in the work that they're doing as a result. So, I would say, just get comfortable with AI. If you aren't using it already, you should be using it immediately, just, asking the questions. But ultimately, that's what it's going to come down to, being comfortable with ultimately AI being a co-pilot, because it actually is already happening, whether you're a software engineer or not. Some of the best software engineers, they're all, just Googling most of this stuff, right? And now we have AI to just help you do that faster. That's basically all it is, right? And so now we have this great new tool at your disposition. It's the same thing. You don't have to worry so much about, you should be comfortable asking your questions and using those output for whatever your goals are.
Yeah. No, thanks for sharing that. No, that's really good. And man, we should all be embracing AI, but thanks for sharing those tips, because that person that's listening is probably going to be able to pick up a few things and know, okay, maybe I should be learning how to interact with AI. Maybe a step further would be learning how to build it, how people communicate with it, how it communicates with other things, the communication of things, that becomes really important. So thanks for sharing that. So let's shift a little bit.
Sure.
One of the things we were talking about earlier is, sometimes we all kind of want to be a founder because it's glamorized and, it's fetishized and all this kind of stuff. And maybe that's not the path for everyone, right? And there's this story of the former CEO of Microsoft, Steve Ballmer, is on pace to receive about $1 billion in dividends alone. So this is passive income. But he was an employee of Microsoft, and you can see the reward of that. And so certain people might say, you know what, the entrepreneurial route, the founder route, the startup route is not for me. I'm going to stick to being an employee. And as you've heard, right, there could be some tremendous results that comes with that. What would you tell that person?
Yeah, I think it goes back to being introspective in terms of what your risk tolerance is, right? Being an entrepreneur is about taking risks. And being also an employee is also just equally as fine, right? And so it comes down to doing a personal inventory. If you know who you are, right, you can really decide what you want for your life. So for example, if you're an employee, if we would just put timeline together, right, based on the outcome for Steve Ballmer and say, let's just say Bill Gates, right? Well, Bill Gates didn't really have to wait until, to start getting passive income, right? I mean, we all know Bill Gates. He's, one of the, world most, successful entrepreneur, right? Whereas Steve Ballmer, you could argue that, he's just now starting to earn sort of like the dividends, right? So, you have to assess the type of person you are, right? Whether you're comfortable, being an employee and so therefore earning a salary and in hopes that in the future, right, you get the passive income as a result, right? Or hey, if your risk tolerance is higher, therefore you can go and be an entrepreneur, right? So both are perfectly fine, and it's a matter of again doing your own self-assessment, right? Because understanding who you are will actually allow you to determine and decide whether you're the Steve Ballmer type, right, or you're the Bill Gates type, or like any other entrepreneur that we know.
Yeah. And how important is it to engage the right minds, right? So, in your journey, for example, whether it's you've come up with an idea and you say, wow, I want to do this. But the next step is you kind of have to work with other people, right, in order to bring that idea to life. How important is that?
Incredibly important. I mean, nothing is done by just one person, right? You have to have the ability to convince people to journey on the journey, to build something with you where there's nothing, right? And it takes a certain personality that people actually want to follow and lead, right? That means your level of empathy has got to be incredibly. So there's a caveat to this. Your level of empathy has to be high in a sense that you have to really understand your customers and know how to interact with your employees. But at the same time, there's a certain level of courage that you also need in order to be able to work and deal with people, right? Because people come with all shades and experiences, right? So in my company, for example, like each one of my team members, I interact with them almost slightly differently than others, right? Because I know each one's background, I know kind of where, and that as a leader, these are things that are incredibly important to you. You have to know what your teammates' lives are, right? So I actually so my employees, I actually know, some things that are happening in their personal lives, right? Because then that shapes how we're thinking about bonuses, compensation, and things of that nature, right? Because look, if someone, let's say for example, is expecting a baby, right? Well, we're going to make sure that she's actually earning a decent salary, and let's say things aren't super rosy, we need to cut costs, for example, right? Well, if I know this person is expecting a baby, we need to make sure that, she's still earning her salary, maybe a little bit more because, she has someone who she's expecting, right? And then the other person who's maybe a bachelor, we can be like, okay, hey, look, we're going through some rough patches right now. We need to, work out, but without knowing the employee sort of personal situation, it makes it harder you can just run a blanket company, right?
Yeah.
And so you need to have the emotional maturity to be able to engage with people where they are, right, while still moving the organization forward. And so I know that's something that, I think I want to say we're very proud that I spent a lot of time doing that, getting to know my team. Because then, again, I think people's personal life can very quickly interfere with their work life, right? And so by being abreast of that, we can really work through issues together, meaning that, we can all accelerate, we can all grow faster together.
Hello there. Thank you for listening up to this point. It means the world to me. If you enjoyed this episode, check out my conversation with Paul Mickey Apabili, part of our Epic Entrepreneur series. Peace.